Boa tarde a todas, boa tarde a todos. Muito obrigado mais uma vez pela parceria de vocês, pela participação. Vamos dar início à sessão, revisão de confiança, melhores práticas para peer reviewers. Novamente, essa é fruto de uma parceria do portal de periódicos CAPES com a editora Carger, então faço um agradecimento especial a Andréa Vieira, ao Armando Peixoto, Stefânia Ribeiro, Cláudia Machado, que abraçaram essa iniciativa. Hoje é o último, né, dessa série de 4 webinários que nós oferecemos, mas espero que nos próximos meses já possamos oferecer outras sessões com temas bastante interessantes também. Eu vou passar um breve vídeo do portal de periódicos, ler uma informação aqui, falo da editora Carga e depois a gente dá início à sessão, beleza? O vídeo ele não tem áudio mesmo, tá? Então, o portal de periódicos da Coordenação de Aperfeiçoamento de Pessoal de Nível Superior, da CAPES, é um dos maiores acervos científicos virtuais do país, que reúne e disponibiliza conteúdos produzidos nacionalmente e outros assinados com editoras internacionais a instituições de ensino e pesquisa no Brasil. São mais de 39 mil periódicos com texto completo, 396 bases de dados de conteúdos diversos, como referências, patentes, estatísticas, material audiovisual, normas, técnicas, teses, dissertações, livros e obras de referência. Ele foi criado para reunir material científico de alta qualidade e disponibilizá-lo à comunidade acadêmica brasileira. Assim, o portal de periódicos tem o objetivo de reduzir as assimetrias regionais no acesso à informação científica, cobrindo todo o território nacional. É considerado uma iniciativa única no mundo, pois um grande número de instituições acessa o acervo, que é inteiramente financiado pelo governo federal. O portal de periódicos propicia o desenvolvimento tecnológico e a inovação no país, por contribuir com o crescimento da produção científica nacional, bem como a inserção cada vez maior da ciência brasileira no exterior. É, portanto, fundamental as atribuições da CAPES de fomento, avaliação e regulação dos cursos de pós-graduação. A editora Carger, brevemente, é uma editora global, com a matriz na Suíça, e começou as suas contribuições em 1890. Atualmente temos escritórios regionais em 15 países diferentes no mundo. Tem publicações originais de Freud, entre outros pesquisadores que receberam o prêmio Nobel, por exemplo. São 105 periódicos, publica mais de 30 livros por ano. Temos 85 sociedades médicas parceiras internacionalmente que escolhem os títulos da Carger para publicar suas pesquisas de maneira oficial, 200 editores-chefes, 3 mil editorial board members e aproximadamente 18 mil peer reviewers que fazem essa engrenagem funcionar. O portal de periódicos oferece o acesso a 18 títulos, diversas especialidades médicas e também odontologia, nutrição, dermatologia, imuno, neonatologia, entre outras áreas. Então, se esses títulos conversam com a sua especialidade, eu te convido que possa, através do portal de periódicos, acessar e conhecer as novas pesquisas que foram publicadas nesses periódicos da editora Carger. Lembro também do nosso livro que está disponibilizado gratuitamente, como conseguir publicar o seu artigo biomédico, um guia prático, material bastante didático, só fazer a leitura, escanear o QR Code, baixar a sua versão e poder utilizar isso no momento aí de preparação do seu manuscrito. Realmente ele compartilha as melhores práticas de publicação, o que fazer na introdução, no método, resultados, quais são os erros que se deve evitar, entre outras melhores práticas. Então, fica o material disponibilizado para vocês. E revisão de confiança, melhores práticas para peer reviewers. Nós temos a Grania novamente como a nossa palestrante. Ela é gerente de integridade de pesquisa, ética de publicação na editora Cargill, lidera uma equipe responsável por desenvolver as políticas de integridade de pesquisa e conduzir as investigações em todos os periódicos da editora relacionados a esses temas de ética. Recebeu seu PhD em Neurociência Integrativa pela Universidade de Cardiff, no Reino Unido, atuou como pesquisadora na própria Universidade de Cardiff e Londres, antes de passar a trabalhar com integridade na pesquisa e publicação de livros e periódicos científicos. Sobre as perguntas, vocês podem colocar na parte de Q&A, pode colocar tanto em inglês ou português, o que preferirem. Se for em português, eu tenho um tempo aqui para traduzir e a gente vai endereçar ali mais para o final da sessão, beleza? Então, convido a todos que possam colocar as perguntas, fiquem à vontade e depois nós disponibilizamos a gravação, onde também a gente vai colocar uma legenda nas falas da Grania. Okay, then, Grania, thanks a lot again for your time, for your availability, embracing these ideas since the beginning. Now that you told me that it's 5 p.m. on a Friday on your side, so wordless to thank you to share your knowledge with us. So thanks a lot. And whenever you are ready, please feel free to share your screen and let's start.
Okay, yes, thank you very much for having me, even if it is 5 p.m. on a Friday evening in London, in the UK. As Victoria said, my name is Grania. Hello to those of you who attended the webinar a few weeks ago on ethical open science and open research. And hello to those of you who are just attending for the first time today. My name is Grania, and I'm the Research Integrity and Publication Ethics Manager at Cargill. And I'm going to take you through some of the key things to think about when you are coming to act as a peer reviewer and acting as a peer reviewer for building trust in research. So today what I want to talk about is give everybody an overview on peer review process and what we mean by that today, as well as what the importance of reviewing for trust. And then we're going to go through the whole process of becoming a reviewer, getting an invitation to review, reading the manuscript itself and writing the report, with a real focus on actions and things you can do. If you've been to any of my webinars before or watched them on YouTube, I really focus on actions that can be done and not just talking about theory, so that you can go away tomorrow and do something that is going to help you become the peer reviewer that you want to be. So first, I'm going to just get everybody on the same page about peer review and reviewing for trust. I'm sure that this will be old information to some of you and new information to some of you, but maybe you'll learn something new along the way. So I'm going to start off with a poll. So if Victor doesn't mind launching question 1 for everybody. So please answer here. Have you ever reviewed a manuscript? Maybe no, maybe you have reviewed for a journal, but there's other kinds of peer review that happen between you and your colleagues. So maybe you've reviewed, but not for a journal. For example, you could have reviewed post-publication or reviewed a preprint. And even more informally, when you might have reviewed your colleagues' work. So before they've even submitted to a journal for publication, your colleagues might have asked you to read over their manuscript and give them feedback for improvements. All of that is peer review because they are your peers and you're reviewing their work. So I try not to think of peer review as just happening in the context of a journal, and actually happening continuously throughout the research cycle. So there's a lot of answers coming in, and I can see that there's a bit of variation in experience. So that's really great. And if you have any questions later, we'll put them in the question Q&A box and we can get to them. So for now, I'm going to talk about the cycle of research. Now, this might be familiar to you if you came to the Open Science webinar. This is the exact same graphic that I showed where I was talking about research as being a cycle and how open science practices can act at different points during that cycle to improve the trustworthiness of that research. If you didn't manage to attend that webinar and that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can contact Victor after this. I think the recordings are available. And during that, we really focused on the design, execution, and publishing of research. Additionally, there was a webinar in April talking about disseminating your research. And again, if you're interested in that topic, I really encourage you to reach out to Victor and maybe get access to that recording. But today we're going to talk about a really crucial part of the research cycle and making sure that what gets disseminated is robust and trustworthy, and that's the peer review process. So this is an overview of the peer review process at Carger Publishers. Now, different journals have different peer review processes. Some journals do post-publication peer review, some do exclusively pre-publication peer review, but broadly, every peer review process sort of looks the same. So where you as researchers submit a manuscript, the editorial office usually performs some sort of preliminary check to make sure that the manuscript is in line with our editorial policies, that necessary statements, say a statement of ethics or data availability statements, are included in the manuscript. And once everything is checked by the editorial office in terms of policies, it gets sent to an editor to make a scientific assessment on whether or not the manuscript is suitable for a journal. And that may be, is the manuscript in scope for the journal? Is it an interesting study? Could it be interesting to the readers? And is it worth sending out for review? So at that stage, the editor might decide to reject without considering further, or they might decide to send it for review, and in which case a handling editor will invite reviewers who will read the manuscript and give feedback to the editor on what they think in terms of the scientific rigor, the description of the results and the discussion, and as well as the contribution of the manuscript to the field. The editor then takes the reviewer's opinions as well as their own opinion and makes a decision. So the decision might be minor revisions are required. For example, some additional text needs to be given in the limitations section, or extra detail is needed in the manuscript methods section. It might be that actually the reviewers have pointed out a sort of fundamental flaw in how the study is designed, and it means that the manuscript is unlikely to be sufficiently improved during the peer review process to be suitable for publication, and so the manuscript might be rejected at that stage. And there might be major revisions required. So for example, authors might need to do another experiment or completely rewrite the manuscript. And if the authors decide to revise and address the reviewer's comments, the whole process starts again, and then gets to hopefully what everyone here wants is an acceptance decision. But today we're really going to focus on this stage, stage 5, where the external reviewers are assessing the manuscript and how that works. So as I mentioned, the editor invites reviewers with the appropriate expertise to review the manuscript, and then the reviewers give their opinion to the editor on whether they think the manuscript is suitable for publication or if any revisions are required. So in this example, you might have 2 reviewers that agree the manuscript is suitable for publication, maybe some revisions are required, but fundamentally the reviewers are happy with the work that's there and the manuscript gets published. Now, that's a very straightforward example. They're not always this straightforward. Sometimes one reviewer is extremely positive about the merits in the study and another reviewer is a little bit unsure about, maybe the methodological rigor in the manuscript. And so in these circumstances, the editor reads both the review reports in the context of the various expertise of the reviewers and as well as their own judgment, and decides whether or not the manuscript gets published. And they may decide that the reviewer 2's concerns are not so great that the manuscript can't be published, and it gets accepted and published. However, editors may not be experts in the area that the manuscript is, and they want another opinion. So often you'll see that, or occasionally you'll see that maybe a 3rd reviewer is invited to give the editor another opinion. And the editor and this reviewer might echo previous reviews, or they might have a totally different opinion to previous reviewers, and the editor takes all of these into consideration. On top of the review reports, of course, is the nuance of the various expertise of the individual reviewers. So you might have a reviewer that's an absolute expert on the subject of metastatic breast cancer, for example, but they are not an expert on the method used in the manuscript. You know, they work with patients, they're not an expert on in vitro methodology. So you have a methods expert who is an absolute expert on modeling cancer in cell lines in vitro, but knows very little about metastatic breast cancer. And so these are the editors taking into account the expertise of the individual reviewers when putting together what their decision to the authors is going to be. And it might be the case that the editor thinks, okay, well, actually even though the topic expert says that this is an important contribution to the field, and the methods expert says that there are some limitations, the statistics expert has pointed out some fairly fundamental flaws in this that are unlikely to be rectified during peer review, and the manuscript has to be rejected. So it's quite, it can be quite a complicated process with a lot of nuance. And what I hope that it's clear from this is that there's a lot of space for your various expertise within the peer review process. So why do we review it all, and why is it so important to have trust in research? So for all research, and particularly for us at Carter Publishers, we publish health sciences research, and we know that this research is going to go on to influence government policy, likely directly impact patient care, and certainly go on to influence future research. And so it's really important to us that all of the research that we publish is trustworthy. And that's really where our reviewers come in, because the peer reviewers play a central role in ensuring that the research that we publish is trustworthy and that it is described in a transparent and potentially reproducible way. So I gave, this is a bit of an example to explain what I mean by the benefit of a good peer reviewer. And these are two statements that say essentially the same thing, that 100 participants were recruited and 90 of them were randomly assigned into two groups. The same thing is said in both instances. However, a good peer reviewer will pick up the fact that there's a lot of information missing in terms of the setting, how the participants were recruited, how they were what the inclusion criteria were, and how the allocation happened. And this is all really important for the reproducibility of that research. So another researcher can go and do the same study again and maybe get the same results, building on the trustworthiness of that research. Because if the detail isn't there, then the research can't be built upon. So I hope that I have instilled in you the importance of peer reviewers in laying excellent foundations for trust in research. And so we'll get into a bit of the meat of the presentation about how and what, the how, what, and why of getting involved in peer review and peer reviewing for trust. So I'm going to ask Victor to launch the second question and ask, how have you been involved in peer review? So we know that many of you have reviewed for a journal and in other ways, but there's lots of different interactions that you could have had with peer review. You might yourself have received comments for your manuscript, might have acted as a reviewer. Journal Club is another fantastic example of a peer review process where you're presenting the strengths and limitations of an article to your peers. You might have, as I mentioned, you might have reviewed a preprint that's available online. So there's lots of different things that you're already doing that is probably some kind of peer review, just maybe you didn't think about it in that way. It's really interesting to see a lot of you have experience as receiving comments from your manuscript. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, because I think that receiving comments is, at least in my experience, receiving peer reviewers' comments was a great instruction on how I maybe didn't want to be when I was a peer reviewer and wanted to focus on maybe more polite comments than I think some of us have probably received in the past. So that's great. I think that lots of people have a good foundation for what we're talking about today. So I think that's going to be really helpful. And I'll just move on. Okay. So certainly, and I get this feedback a lot, that the first time and even the first few times that you write a review report can be quite intimidating. How journals structure the peer review process can vary. Sometimes it's extremely structured and you are answering a series of questions or even answering a series of multiple choice questions. And sometimes it's a blank box and you have no structure at all. What's really different about peer review versus reading an article for yourself is that when you read an article for yourself, you're likely thinking about, okay, how does this article impact my research? What does this mean for me? And, is this something that how could this change my future direction of research? Whereas when you were reading a manuscript as a peer reviewer, you're thinking, okay, what is the strengths and limitations of this study by itself, and how does it contribute to the literature, and is there any ways that the manuscript could be improved? So it's a very subtly different skill, but it's a really important skill, and like any skill, it needs to be practiced. So one sort of action, if you're not already doing it, is to join a journal club if it's available in your department, and if not, maybe consider starting a journal club with your colleagues, where you take it in turns to present a recent article in your field of research, highlighting the strengths, weaknesses, and maybe any improvements in there, because this is exactly the same process that you will be doing as a peer reviewer. So some of the feedback we get a lot is, how do I get involved in peer review in the first place? And the most common answer that you will get when you ask that question is publishing articles, because the best way for an editor to know about your research and your areas of expertise is publishing your work. But of course, for early career researchers, that isn't always necessarily an opportunity that you've had. Maybe you're working on experiments still, maybe you're halfway through writing manuscripts, maybe your manuscripts are under review themselves and not published yet. And so it's a little bit harder to make it known what your areas of expertise are if you're in that circumstance. And so that's why I'd suggest considering publishing protocols of your work. Now, we talked a little bit about this in the open research section and how important publishing protocols is for trust in science. And by doing this, you're really showing your commitment to open science and reproducibility and raising your profile within the research community. So it has the benefit of being able to add this to your CV, being able to get recognition for the work that's ongoing, as well as being able to build your public expertise for potential invitations for peer review. So if you haven't done it already, I recommend setting up a public researcher profile like ORCID or Web of Science researcher profile that can link your publications, your employment history, your education history with your peer review history. So all of it is in one place, and editors can see that you are a very active reviewer, as well as have published in the areas that you published in. So I encourage people to do that if they haven't, and if they have an ID, make sure that it's up to date. Another great way to volunteer for peer review, as well as practicing your peer review skills, is reviewing preprints. So I'm sure that I don't need to explain what a preprint is to this audience, but we all know that researchers are more and more posting preprints of their work to get feedback from their colleagues, raise their visibility of their work, and get recognition for the work that hasn't been published in a journal yet. However, lots of studies have shown that preprints themselves don't actually get that many comments, and just slightly over 7% of preprints in fact have comments. And so authors and researchers are out there looking for feedback without receiving any back from the community. So I think this is a great stepping stone to the peer review process. And one action that I suggest is looking at preprints that are in your area of research and just highlighting the strengths of that preprint. You don't need to go into pointing out some areas for improvement. It could be as simple as I mentioned, getting into that mindset of reading an article with the mindset of what is the strength of this article, and not how does this impact and relate to my research, because it's a great way of practicing peer review. Very similar is post-publication commentary. So I mentioned that peer review isn't peer review is changing, and it's not just pre-publication peer review done within a journal setting. There's now post-publication peer review. I mentioned journal clubs, commentary articles, and social media are all places that discussion is happening about the strengths and limitations of scholarly publications. Also, the ability to do post-publication peer review is integrated on some journals' websites themselves, or can happen on dedicated dedicated reviewer web platforms, so websites that are just dedicated to post-publication peer review. So if you haven't already, I would suggest creating a social media account, or if you have one, maybe following active researchers in your field and participating in ongoing conversations about new research. And this not only helps you practice that skill of peer review, but also raises your visibility within the community as somebody who is engaged in reviewing. And that relates to the next point, which is, if you wish to volunteer for peer review, one great way of doing that is contacting the editor themselves and letting them know that you're available. You're available to review. If any of your supervisors are editors, you will know how much of an editor's role is focused on finding suitable reviewers with relevant expertise and availability to review manuscripts that get submitted. And they're always looking to, most are happy to expand their network and find new reviewers that they aren't aware of with expertise that might be useful. So I recommend, when you are expanding your network on social media, to consider following the editor-in-chief or associate editors of some of your kind of most read journals or favorite journals, so that you can see what journal updates, see if there's any call for new reviewers, and generally participate in the conversation. And similar to contacting editors, most journals do have a process for contacting them directly to volunteer for peer review. I would encourage all of you to consider applying to be a reviewer at Carger Publishers. We make it really easy to apply to be a reviewer at several journals at once. It might be that you regularly read several Carger journals and could see yourself as reviewing in several of them. And so we make it really easy to volunteer or to apply to be a reviewer in several journals at once. So that QR code will take you to the application form, and it explains all the benefits of being a reviewer at Carger Publishers. But if you don't have time to scan that now, or you miss the QR code, as I mentioned, this is being recorded. And so you can reach out to me later if you want access to the link, or reach out to Victor later for the recording. And finally, one really common way to get into peer review is peer reviewing with a mentor. Now, some of you might already be doing this with your supervisor, that your supervisor has been asked to review a manuscript, and they ask if you want to help them review it. So this is a great way to prepare a review report with support. And it's a real confidence booster to know that you're on the right track when you're writing a review report. So I would encourage you, if you don't already, to ask your mentor if you could help them with their next peer review. I do note it here that it's really important that before your supervisor or mentor shares any peer review files with you, that they inform and get permission from the editor and the editorial office before doing so, because everything within the peer review process is kept confidentially, and so they shouldn't be, and manuscripts and details of review shouldn't be shared with anybody outside of that, without the knowledge and okay from the editor and the editorial office. So it's a great way to get experience, but just make sure that you inform the journal office itself when doing so. So you've gone out there, you've practiced peer review at a journal club, you've got involved in post-publication peer review, and as a result of all the efforts in expanding your network, you've received your first request to review a manuscript. So the next section is what to do when you receive that request to review a manuscript with reviewing for trust in mind. So now I'm going to ask you first, what do you think? So I'll ask Victor to launch, I think, poll 3. What is the first thing you think that you should ask yourself when you receive the request to review a manuscript? I think that it is really exciting. I certainly was very excited every time. When I was still a researcher, it was very exciting every time I received an invitation to review a manuscript. We're going to talk through some of the questions here, and the kind of pros and cons, and the importance of thinking about all of these things before saying yes, because as I'm sure you're aware, it has a big impact on the peer review process, whether or not you are ready, willing, and able to say yes to that review. So great spread of answers here, so that's fantastic. And so we're going to talk about all of these topics now. So thanks very much for everybody for filling in the form. I hope that you can all see the kind of really interesting spread there. Yeah, and this is what I was already talking about, that it is really exciting when you get your first invitation to review something, and it's exciting to be able to read research before it's published, be the first one to know about a new development in your area of research. But it's important to think before saying yes immediately. So of course, the first thing, and I think it was picked up in the survey, is to think to yourself, do I have the expertise to review this? And there are many aspects to a study that you may have the appropriate expertise to review. So in the example I said above that, you might be a topic expert, but not necessarily a methods expert in this. And you might be a methods expert, but you don't know so much about the topic itself. So that doesn't mean that you can't review it. It just means that you have an area within the manuscript you can focus on. And in the interest of kind of building trust in your review report, it's important to be clear that you say, okay, well, you explain the limitations of your own review, that I am not a topic expert in this, but I am an expert in the methods that the authors have used, and here's my review based on that. And it may be that the editor says specifically to you, I would like you to look at the use of statistics in this manuscript, and it's not relevant for you to review the rest of it because it's totally out of your area of expertise. So the editor might give you instruction, they might not, but it's always important to be transparent for trust in review about the limitations of your own knowledge. It's also really important to remember that you're not obliged to say yes because you receive an invitation from an editor. If you don't think that you have the relevant expertise, maybe it's slightly related to what you do, but actually it's an adjacent field and you wouldn't do the review justice. Just let the editor know that. They'll appreciate you getting back to them, and they will appreciate you giving that feedback, so that the next time they get a manuscript in a field closer to your area of research, they will think of you and be able to invite you to review that. Something that doesn't often get talked about when considering whether to accept a review invitation is if you understand the kind of peer review process that happens in the journal. Now, there are lots of different kinds of peer review that I'm sure you're aware of, even within pre-publication peer review. So the most common at Carter publishers is single anonymous, where the authors don't know who the reviewers are, but the reviewers know who the authors are. And this is contrasted with double anonymous peer review, where neither the authors don't know who the reviewers are and the reviewers don't know who the authors are. More and more journals have some kind of open peer review, where the reviewers and authors do know who each other are, and that might be accompanied with publishing the review report itself. So before saying yes to reviewing for a journal, it's just important to know what peer review they're using and what that means for you. It's great to have your name listed as a peer reviewer on an article. It really helps raise visibility, and you get credit for your contribution to the peer review process. You don't need to review in a journal that has open peer review in order to get credit for your peer reviews. At Carter, it's really easy to claim credit and put it on your ORCID profiles so that it's clear that you have peer reviewed for all of these Carter publisher journals. We also, in most journals, publish a list of names of all the people who have reviewed in our journals that year. So it's really easy to get credit, no matter what kind of peer review process the journal has. but it's important for you as the reviewer to be familiar with the peer review process that you're getting involved in. Another really important question is whether or not you have a potential conflict of interest with this manuscript. And what that means is a potential conflict of interest exists when your judgment of a manuscript could be seen to be influenced by a secondary interest, such as financial gain or maybe a personal relationship with the authors. And journals usually have a conflict of interest policy that requires reviewers to declare if they have a relationship with the authors or anything related to the manuscript. So it's important to check that before agreeing to review. And for trust in research, it's really important to remember that perceptions of conflicts of interest are important as actual conflicts of interest. So in the survey, I gave the example of, this is my friend's manuscript, I want to help them get published, so I should say yes to reviewing that. However, if you are a reader and you notice that the reviewers of the manuscript, the reviewers of the article are the same, are very close friends with the authors of the article, it can in some circumstances damage your trust in that article, because you think, well, did they really get a thorough peer review process because they're friends? And so it might not be doing your friends a favor by agreeing to peer review your articles, because that perception of a conflict of interest can undermine the trust in the research. So it's really important to just think about that before saying yes to review something. And if you do have the potential of a conflict of interest, to declare that to the editor, so it's really transparent. And probably the most important of all is if you have time. You're all extremely busy researchers, I have absolutely no doubt of that. And even if the perfect manuscript comes to your desk exactly in your field of research, you have no conflicts of interest, you know the journal and you know the peer review type and you're happy to do it. If you don't have time to do it within the time frame that they're asking, it's better to say no and maybe suggest a colleague who could help the editor. The editor would much prefer that you let them know that you don't have the time to do it and suggest somebody than maybe say yes, but actually can't find the time to complete that review report for a month or two. And I'm sure the authors would, as an author, I'm sure you can appreciate a shorter peer review process is always preferable to a longer peer review process. And so it won't mean that the editor won't ask you the next time. It just means that you can't review the manuscript in this instance. And I wanted to give a little bit of a flashback to a slide that I included in the open research presentation. This is about whether or not the journal is a trusted journal. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that the journal is not a predatory journal. So that's a journal that offers light to no peer review in exchange for maybe charging a fee to authors for publication. And it usually means that their articles don't get indexed in databases like Scielo or PubMed. So it doesn't help the authors, and for you as a reviewer, it isn't maybe the best use of your time. So I wanted to put this slide in to remind everybody that this applies just as well when you're a reviewer as when you're an author, that your time is very precious, and it's important that you are giving that time to trusted journals and not journals that don't have the kind of best interests of researchers at heart. So you've practiced peer review, you've developed your network, you've got that first invitation to review a manuscript, and you've said yes. So what are the things you should be thinking about when peer reviewing for trust? So this is really another survey. So I'll ask Victor to launch it, and you can tick as many boxes as you want. And it's really just, what do you think about what does a trustworthy piece of research look like? And what that means is different to different people. And there are pros and cons for focusing on as many, there are pros and cons for focusing on all of the items on this list. And we'll talk about some of them, and we talked about some of them already in the open research presentation as well. So I do encourage you to go and have a look at that webinar. So yeah, please go ahead and tick as many of the items that you think apply in your opinion, there isn't like one right answer that we're going to come out and say it's actually, the most trustworthy piece of research is the authors share their data and code publicly. This is really just, what's your opinion? Just want you to think a little bit about, like, what does trustworthy research look like to you? The questions come in, there's 10 options there, so I'll give everybody a little minute to think about that and fill in the answers. It's really interesting answers that are coming in. There's a lot of agreement around the importance of not having a conflict of interest, or that the study was approved by an ethics committee. And I think we could talk about any of these topics for a long time, but in the interest of time, we won't. So maybe we can share the results at this stage. Yes. So you can see here the results. There's a lot of variation within the group, which is really interesting, and that different things are important to different people. And there's no, like, everybody thinks one item unanimously indicates a trustworthy piece of research. This indicates a trustworthy piece of research. So that's super interesting to me. So with all that in mind about what does trustworthy research look like, what does that look like when you are actually acting as a reviewer? So as I mentioned, journals vary in how much structure there is in their review reports. And but what most journals have, if not all journals, is some kind of guidance for reviewers to help you structure your review report. What I've outlined here are 5 broad points that are probably covered in every guidance for reviewers for every journal. And that's things like, is the manuscript in scope for the journal? What are the main strengths and limitations? Is it scientifically sound? Does it contribute to the field? Is it really embedded in the existing literature? Are the references cited and representative? So if you want to know more detail and background about what guidance for reviewers looks like, I encourage you to have a look at the Carger guidelines for reviewers. And these are freely available on the website, for transparency, and so that anyone can see what we ask our reviewers to look for in our article. So please do go and have a look, and perhaps even apply to be a reviewer while you're there. So in the interest of time, I'm going to talk about reviewing for trust just in research studies. But of course, you could be asked to review any kind of study. It could be a review, it could be a letter, it could be a commentary piece, it could be an opinion piece, it could be anything. But we're going to talk about research because that is the bulk of articles that at least we publish at Carger Publishers. And I've broken reviewing for trust into 2 sections, and that's where the research fits into the bigger picture and how the research was done. So what do I mean about where the research fits into the bigger picture? This is how have the authors framed their research in terms of what's already been done? How have they explained what gap this is filling in the current literature, and how have they explained how their study adds to the literature on the subject? So when reviewing for trust, it's really important, obviously, to think not only have authors cited previous literature, but have they cited it representative breadth of the literature. So it's not ideal, of course, if authors are cherry picking what references they want to put into their introduction that makes their study look a certain way, maybe looks like it is a novel, groundbreaking study, when in fact this has been well studied in the literature before. So it's really important that as a reviewer for trust that the previous literature on the subject is fairly represented and that it's justified, so that the authors include justification for why they are doing their study and what methods they have chosen and that is it a standard in the field and cite previous research on that, or it's a new method that they're applying in a new area, and how they've come to that conclusion. So it's just really important for transparency and trust that all of that background information is provided. So if all of the background information is representative and well justified, the study needs to be addressing some kind of gap in knowledge. And I want to really stress that addressing a gap in knowledge doesn't mean that every study has to be a significant novel study. A lot of studies are novel, but not all studies are. It's really replication studies are really important, and null results are really important, and they all address a gap in our knowledge about maybe the reproducibility of something, or in terms of a null result. I mean, any researcher will say a null result can be as informative as a positive result. So addressing a gap in the knowledge does not mean that it has to be a novel positive piece of research, but what the gap is needs to be clearly described within the manuscript. And as a reviewer, you play a really important role in making sure that the authors clearly explain what the gap is that they're trying to address. Oh, I had a weird display issue. But if the authors have framed the background of their study really clearly, then the next kind of most important thing is framing the results of their study. And it's really important that authors don't overstate their conclusions. And I think this is where reviewers are the most useful at pointing out that when conclusions aren't sufficiently justified by the results that are there. Another important omission for reviewers to point out to authors is conflicting evidence. So when discussing your results in terms of the literature generally, it's traditional to include supporting evidence and conflicting evidence that supports and conflicts with your hypothesis. And so as a reviewer, you play a really key role in making sure that all of that is there. And again, providing evidence that disagrees with your hypothesis shows that you're really being transparent about what's out there and helps build trust in the research. And of course, limitations. There's never been a perfect study conducted ever. I think I can say that. And so every study has some limitation. It might be inherent in that the study is deliberately geographically restricted, and so there might be a limitation in how broadly applicable it is. There might be a limitation that the authors couldn't have anticipated. For example, they might have had to move all of their studies online during the pandemic. Having a limitation is not a negative thing. And as a peer reviewer, you play a really important role in making sure that the limitations of the study are clearly explained so that the conclusions aren't overstated. And all of that, again, builds the trust in that piece of research. So how a piece of research relates to the existing literature, and how was that research done and what did it find? So one is very big picture and one is very focused on the article at hand. And maybe you are an expert in the method and not necessarily the bigger picture, or vice versa. But all of it is really important for trust in research. So one thing that is really helpful as a reviewer is to check if the manuscript adheres to the appropriate reporting guidelines or community standards. So I'm sure you're all familiar with something like Consort or Trend or Prisma reporting guidelines for clinical trials or systematic reviews. But if you're not, or if maybe you didn't realize how many different kinds of reporting guidelines there are, I really encourage you to go and have a look at the Equator Network's reporting guidelines. These will be not only helpful for you as an author when structuring your manuscript and making sure all the relevant information is there, but also as a reviewer. I find them really helpful as nearly like a checklist for you to make sure that authors are including all of the necessary information for reproducibility. So there's a lot of information that's necessary in terms of randomization, anonymization, how the methods were, or how the statistics was conducted, and that can be difficult to remember as a reviewer to check for. And so that's why some of the reporting guidelines are very helpful in making sure that all the necessary information is there. And many journals encourage or require authors to actually upload a completed reporting checklist with their submissions. That can be really helpful as a reviewer. If the authors have omitted anything and you think it's important, then in the review report mention that specifically so the authors can improve their manuscript. So I just mentioned about how much information needs to go in the method section, and it can be hard to remember everything, but it's so important for reproducibility, for all of the necessary information to be there. The question I always ask myself is, could I repeat the experiment myself without asking the authors for any other information, just based on what's in the methods section? And if the answer is no, I ask myself, okay, what's missing? What extra information do I need? And I make sure that that would get included in a review report. Similarly, as a reviewer, you play a really important role in making sure that data is accessible in lines with the community standards and the journal's expectations. So most journals, including all Carger Publishers journals, require that research articles have a data availability statement explaining where the data is available and how it can be accessed. And as a reviewer, so that's something that the editorial office checks and makes sure is present. As a reviewer, you have a really important role in checking the appropriateness of that statement. You know, is it really the community norm to make that data actually fully available publicly, and are authors adhering to that? And if you think that authors aren't adhering to it, you can always include that in your review report, suggesting that they change their data availability statement, considering making the data publicly available. And if they can't, explain why it's not possible to make it publicly available. And finally, and this is where there is some relationship to some of those statements that I mentioned, is does the research meet all the standards in the field of ethically conducted research and research integrity? So you might identify that the authors have conducted research that is maybe not ethical. You know, the use of anesthesia in mice in the experiment maybe is outdated and maybe not considered ethical anymore. Things like that should be brought to the editor's attention, as well as you as a reviewer considering any conflict of interest and funding disclosure statements. You know, authors may have relationships to, for example, pharmaceutical companies that provide support for maybe not the research, but maybe speakers' fees. And so there's a lot of ways that, a lot of relationships that could be perceived as a conflict of interest. And we always ask at Carger that these relationships are declared really clearly in any manuscripts, so that you as a reviewer can include those relationships in your assessment and determine whether you think they undermine the trustworthiness of the research or not. And also important for not undermining the trustworthiness of the research is the figures and tables being accurate reflection of what is in the text. And this sounds really straightforward, but actually there's a lot of things that you can do, maybe to the y-axis and a graph to make results look more significant than they are in reality. And so you as a reviewer play a really important role in looking at the two things in context and saying whether or not you think that the figures and tables are reflecting what's in the text, because I think that you probably know as a reader, you can't read every article in the same level of depth, but you always look at the figures because that tells you the story that you need to know. And so it's really important that what's in the figures matches what's in the text and isn't overstated. So after you've kind of read through the manuscript and thought about all of those things in terms of strengths, limitations, areas for improvement, time's come to write the review report. And we'll go through some top tips, because I think that it's, as I mentioned, different journals have different structures. So I'll give you some general areas and ideas. So last poll, I'll ask Victor to launch. And I want you to, this is thinking about if you have ever received reviewers' comments before and what you thought about them. So maybe you have, maybe you haven't. I think that it's not uncommon to receive constructive, really helpful constructive comments. Sometimes maybe one reviewer is really helpful and constructive, maybe one reviewer was really critical but really helpful, maybe a third reviewer was really critical and didn't even understand what the research was about. You know, you didn't feel that they had read the manuscript thoroughly enough. So I want you to, for this next section, be thinking in your mind, remembering all the review comments that you've had in the past, both the really helpful ones that made you feel that your research had really been understood and appreciated by the reviewer, as well as the not so helpful comments where you as a researcher felt that the reviewer didn't even read the manuscript properly and had no idea what they were talking about. Because I'm sure, I think it's really interesting. You can share the poll now, I think, and see everybody's results. I think this is fairly representative. Most reviewers are excellent. Sometimes you get somebody on a bad day, then you get bad comments. This happens. This happens to everybody, so don't feel bad if you received terrible comments from a reviewer. But do keep that in mind as we're going forward and as you're preparing your first review report. So the review report is essentially the distillation of all of your expertise and all of your opinions, and what your evaluation of the manuscript is for the editor to help them make that decision on the manuscript. And some journals have quite structured review reports and expect you to fill in lots of different sections, you know, specifically asking specific questions. Some other journals have very loose, no structure, and you can structure it however you want. So the next few slides should be helpful no matter what the review report structure is in any journal. And so one of the most important things I think is to be constructive. For the editor as well as the author's benefit, I always recommend starting with a summary of the strengths and limitations of the manuscript in your own words. It helps the editor understand what the contribution of the manuscript is to the field, and it helps the authors realize that you have understood their research, you've really engaged with it, and that the whatever comes next is not due to your lack of understanding or lack of engagement with the subject. With being constructive, I would always say point out ways of improvement without focusing on the flaws, and that does not mean don't point out mistakes or flaws in studies. That means, because that's really important to point out both for the editor and for the authors, but think about how you would want to receive that feedback. So maybe authors could consider reanalyzing their results, taking this variable, you know, controlling for this variable, or using a different kind of regression, instead of saying the statistical analysis is not appropriate. You know, help authors understand what they can do to make their manuscript more suitable for publication, and help the editor understand how significant the flaws are and how much it impacts the publishability of that manuscript. And so related to that is be clear, be specific. If you mean that there's an issue with figure 1, say that the authors need to improve something in figure 1. Try to avoid making sweeping statements. That's very difficult for the editor to understand the severity of any issues you're pointing out, and it's difficult for authors to address if it's a sweeping statement. It can be harder for them to understand what they need to do to make the manuscript better. I also always say that it's really important to separate the need to do from the nice to do. And this might be that it's absolutely necessary that the authors add more information about the exclusion criteria in their methods section, but it would also be nice if they could add an additional control group, you know, had they been doing the study all over again. Because I'm sure that you've all been in the situation, or many of you have been in the situation where you get reviewers' comments back that tell you that you need to have done the experiment in a totally different way, which it's probably a year too late at that stage for that feedback. And so if it's not critically important for the manuscript, you know, absolutely by all means point out the area for improvement. for authors, so the next time they're doing that experiment, they know to include that extra control group, but also make it clear to the editor that you don't think that this necessarily impacts the publishability of the manuscript. However, if you do believe that this control group kind of fundamentally undermines the experiment and all of the results and the conclusions, and actually no revision through peer review is going to make up, and no explanation of the limitations is going to make up for the fact that the study itself is just flawed, please just explain that to the editor. It's the goal is to publish trustworthy research, and sometimes it's necessary to be quite blunt in those circumstances, and again very clear about it. And beyond kind of experimental design flaws, if you suspect misconduct in a manuscript, and be that unethical experimental practices, or as far as data fabrication or falsification, point that out to the editor and the journal office as soon as possible, so that it can be investigated. At Cargo Publishers, that would be investigated by the research integrity team, who look into concerns about suspected misconduct. So there's always a process for investigating it. There's usually a process for confidentially reporting that, maybe directly by emailing the editor. If you are not sure whether or not there is an issue in terms of maybe data falsification in the manuscript. But for trustworthiness of research in general, we need to point out where there is suspected misconduct, because unfortunately it does happen, and peer reviewers play an indispensable role in identifying these as early as possible. And the last point I'm going to make about what to think about, the second last point I'm going to make about what to think about is being confidential. So I mentioned earlier about how important it is to not share information, not ask your mentor to share the manuscript that they're reviewing with you before informing the editor and the editorial office. And so then when you are a reviewer, it's really important that you don't share any information about the peer review process with anybody outside the journal editor and the journal editorial office. The whole process is confidential, and that includes the manuscripts, the details, the decisions. It's very exciting to get to read research before it's published, but it's a real violation of trust in the peer review process as a whole to disclose things without the knowledge and consent of the people involved. And so it's just really important to be confidential where the peer review type requires that. And this is the last point that I wanted to make for you to think about when you're writing that review report, is being kind. I always say write the comments that you would want to receive, and by that I don't mean always write positive comments and never point out flaws. Absolutely not. I think for trustworthiness in research, it's so important to point out the flaws as well as the strengths, as well as the limitations in any piece of research. But your best friend will tell you if your hair doesn't look good today without making you feel bad about it. And so there's always a way to frame criticism or critical feedback in a review report that makes it a little bit easier to read. And editors always appreciate a reviewer that does that, and are likely to invite them to review again because they can be trusted to give a constructive, clear and kind review report. So that is kind of a whistle-stop tour through what it takes to go from getting involved in peer review process to writing that review report for the editor to consider when making a decision about a manuscript. So I did a little infographic of all of the actions that you could take away from today if you're interested in getting involved in reviews, in peer review, or if you're already involved in peer review and want to think a little bit more about peer reviewing for trust. And so practicing peer review, either through journal clubs, through interactions with colleagues online, through post-publication peer review, is all great ways of practicing the skill and expanding your network and raising your profile as an active reviewer within the community, which means that you will be invited to review manuscripts, and you can ask yourself whether you have the expertise, whether you understand the peer review type, whether you have a potential conflict of interest, and whether you have the time to review that manuscript for trust. And when you are reviewing for trust, I think the headline I always think about is think about transparency. You know, are the methods transparent? Is the existing literature clearly outlined and fairly represented? And are the conclusions of the study fair and reflective of and appropriate for the results that were obtained? And when you're thinking about all of that and putting it into a review report, don't forget the 4 C's, as I say, but cheating a bit because one is a K, to be constructive, clear, confidential, and kind. And that means that you will be invited to review more manuscripts because you're thinking about improving research and making research more trustworthy, and the process can start again. And then maybe one day you'll be an editor and you can help early career researchers get into peer review as well. So Carger is, I'll just give a couple of slides about what we're doing throughout the cycle of knowledge, and I have some information about training that we give for reviewers. You know, I said the importance of transparency for us in trustworthiness for research, and so we have support for researchers throughout the cycle of knowledge for improving trustworthiness of their research. Now, whether that be for you as a researcher, we do some in-person workshops on research integrity and reproducibility, and we have online training modules on how to conduct ethically sound research if this is something that you are interested in, and it's available in 9 different languages. We also provide training for our reviewers. So if you are a Carger reviewer, we have an online interactive training that of about 5 hours with me and other subject experts on how to peer review and how to review different kinds of studies that we didn't have the time to get into today. And if you're interested in this subject a little bit and would like to know more, we have webinars on our YouTube channel where we've talked about the importance of peer review for building trust in research. So I encourage you, if this has just stirred your appetite, to go and have a look at that video. And yes, my contact information is here if you have any questions after this, or are interested in applying to be a reviewer. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Victor. I'm sure we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Thanks a lot, Grania. Always very nice. You putting together the theory, but also very practical aspects to help, like on a daily basis, reviewing activity. Let me go to the comments and questions. First of all, some compliments. Professor McNamara is very didactic. Thanks a lot for this session. This presentation has been amazing. I'm loving it, and very practical advice. I particularly liked the tips for practicing reviewing. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Well, we have some questions. First one, I wonder how common it is for a paper to get accepted without even minor reviews?
I would say very rare. It's not that I've never seen it happen. It's just extremely rare. I think that we could all agree that there's no such thing as the perfect study. There's also no such thing as the perfect manuscript. I mean, even the top scientist in the world might forget who their audience is and can have some clarity improvements that are necessary to, explain terms that they're so familiar with that they've forgotten to define. So I think it's not that it never happens, but it's very rare. And I think particularly for research articles that we were focusing on today, it's extremely rare to submit a perfect manuscript that doesn't need any changes.
Great, thank you. What will the future of revisions look like? Is there any possibility that the publishers will submit the review to the community as they do with preprint repositories at some point in the future?
I think this is a really exciting question, and that there's a lot happening in with different publishers in this area. So some publishers actually assign DOIs to the reviews themselves, which makes the review reports citable. So when you're writing a manuscript, you can not only cite the article, but cite a particular review done by somebody, which I think really, the review itself is still usually hosted on the journal website, but it means that the discoverability is much greater. And I think it helps recognize the fact that writing a review report is a substantial piece of work. And by assigning that DOI, it means it recognizes that there are contributions in review reports that are, can be as interesting as reviews themselves or other articles. Some of the preprint servers do have integrations with other post-publication, or not post-publication, but other other peer review sites. So when you go onto medRxiv or bioRxiv, you don't just see comments there, and you don't just see the Twitter thread. You can see comments that have been published elsewhere. So for example, on PubPeer, which is a really popular post-publication review site, but also you can post about preprints on there. They will pull in the comments from other locations. So I think that what journals and publishers will maybe start doing is more integrations like that you are signaling where the conversation is happening on other places online, rather than you as a reader having to go to all the different preprint or other repositories trying to find commentary on that. So like on Carragher articles, we always have the altmetric badge, and that links out to all of the different places that that article has been talked about. So whether it's Twitter, whether it's blogs, Reddit, news articles, patent applications. So I think that that is, for a reader, a really great way of accessing all the conversation around a piece of research in one place when you're getting the article at the same time. You're on mute, Victor.
Sorry, thanks a lot. I think it also connects with other questions here. Let me just... So it's a bit tricky to demand excellence for reviewers when they do not receive any financial advantage being volunteers. Do you have any suggestions on how to encourage the reviewers to train? And I think what you just said connects, like once you have your review as a citable item, it definitely encourages you much more to do a nice work and to prepare yourself better, because then you are expanding your contribution, and actually that might have academic impact on your life. So that's why I think it was sort of connected. But if you want to also, please.
Yeah, I would like to talk about this, because I think that this comes up all the time about how busy researchers are and how time consuming doing a review report is. We talked about this for an hour today, but I think the average time that it takes to complete a review is several hours, based on surveys. So it is a substantial amount of work. For Carragher, what we do, the training we provide aims to recognize the work that reviewers are doing and give them additional training, because that they can put on their CV. So these are courses that you download certificates afterwards and show that you have been doing additional training. So when you're coming for maybe promotion, that you can show that you are pursuing other trainings to expand the kind of skill set that you have. We also really, I mentioned that we recognize our reviewers, and I think that this is a really important point, a really important part of raising the visibility of the work that goes into review. Because people talk about how to fairly compensate reviewers, and so at Carragher, we have campaigns occasionally where we offer discounts in publication, in an APC if you've reviewed for us, as a way of saying thank you. We also, apart from the free training courses for our reviewers, we have an integration in our review platform with ORCID, so that it's really easy to get credit for the reviews that you do, and it's really visible. And part of that is, of course, it helps editors know that you're an active reviewer, but we're trying to lay as many foundations as possible so that for your career progression, we, as a publisher, we're not determining whether or not you get a promotion, whether or not you get hired at your university. All we can do is make it as easy as possible for you to show how much work you're doing for the community, so that your institution can recognize that reviewing and editing is as valuable a contribution to the field almost as doing the research itself, because you're, as is the topic today, you're making sure that the research out there is trusted. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's a really important topic.
Yeah, I think that was a nice change, right? Because peer reviewing was always remained like hidden somehow. Mm-hmm. And I think Publons back then also did a nice first move to open a little bit more these contributions. And ORCID nowadays also have the integration to show all the reviews that the scientists are doing.
And actually, I would also point out the benefit of something like Publons and ORCID, as opposed to, I think that it's great, open peer review is great, and having the review reports citable is great, but of course that only shows the work that you've done on accepted manuscripts. But we know that, not every manuscript is accepted, and a lot of reviews inform the editor that the manuscript isn't suitable for publication. So by our integrations with ORCID will recognize the reviews you do for manuscripts that don't get published. So they still count, obviously, and should be recognized. So even if the manuscript you review isn't published, you still will be listed in the name of the, in our publication where we list all the reviewers in the journal, and it still counts for ORCID. So I think that that's really important to point out as well, that we need to recognize the reviews on the rejected manuscripts as well.
Amazing. Very nice to know. So do you think in the future it tends to have only or more open peer review, or perhaps it will have various models and will continue to exist double blind, blind, and will be just a matter of choice of the journal?
This is I think a hot topic at the minute in publishing. And there was a really interesting article, I think at the start of this year, where they showed how, it's not a new study, but it's kind of a concept everyone is aware of, that having a recognizable name is beneficial for getting accepted. So if they had the test article was a Nobel laureate was listed on a manuscript, and then they submitted the same manuscript, and it was a PhD student, and the same manuscript, when it was authored by a Nobel laureate, was more likely to get accepted. And so people, open peer review is a great way for everyone to get recognition for the work they're doing and making peer review more transparent. The slight caveat or negativity of that is that there still is seniority bias within peer review and research, and not only seniority bias, but there's gender bias that varies in its significance depending on the field. There's also, of course, kind of ethnic name bias, basically, that if you have a non-Western name, that can negatively impact the outcome of the peer review process. And then on the other hand, people say that double anonymous is, there's some research that indicates that double anonymous is not an illusion, but it's reviewers are very good at guessing who the authors are in the double anonymous situation. And so all those biases that we just talked about can still be impacting. If you correctly guess that the author is Gráinne McNamara and she's a Nobel laureate, all those biases are still there, but it's under the umbrella of double anonymous. So it's appearing that it's not, there's an appearance of a lack of bias without actually a lack of bias. So that's a really long way of saying that there's a lot of debate in the field. I think that there will always be some variation depending on what the community prefers. Some humanities, I know, are very much committed to double anonymous. some sciences are very much committed to open review. So I think that there will be a community preference. And yeah, I think that there are pros and cons to all kinds of all versions of peer review. And at the moment, I don't think there's a clear winner.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually the next question also relate to this one. What are your thoughts on open peer review and the willingness of reviewers to accept the review? Isn't it scary sometimes to have your name disclosed there? Can also put you on a spotlight, right? For good or for bad?
Yeah, exactly. I think that as an early career researcher, maybe you're a PhD student or a postdoc, you haven't got a full-time permanent job. So accepting to review a manuscript of somebody who is, the head of a department in a university you could be interested in working in, and giving a negative review, I can completely understand that could be quite a scary prospect for you, worrying that there could be career repercussions for you for giving it a negative review. I do think in general that people are becoming more open to open peer review. There are surveys, and there are regular surveys that happen where there's kind of a spectrum of comfort, and it varies by discipline. So some disciplines maybe have had open peer review for longer, and so when researchers are asked, would you be interested in reviewing? Would you be interested in reviewing if it was open peer review? Depending on how long it's been in the community, people are more and less likely to say yes. There are some studies where reviewers can choose whether to add their name to a review report, and so kind of choose to make it open in that sense. And what the results usually show, kind of unsurprisingly, is given the option, reviewers don't tend to put their name down if they are early career or if it's a critical report. So I think there is some, I personally, in general, think that open peer review is a good thing. I don't want to make it sound like I don't think that open peer review isn't a great initiative, but I just want to say I understand that some people might feel like they can't say yes for various reasons, and I think that anyone would understand that. That's why I wanted to include it in the presentation, because it's something to think about when considering to review.
Thank you. Should the reviewer also assess the fluency in the language in which the article is written, or it's not really the main focus of the reviewer?
This is a really interesting question, because I think it comes up a lot, and what I think a lot of reviewers don't realize is that almost all publishers have copy editing departments, so it is not necessary to point out typos in review reports. It's always worth checking if that's what the editor wants you to do if you're not sure, but part of what journals do is make sure that the research that we publish is looks good. The production process, this is what happens, that the copy editing is all improved. Now, if you receive a manuscript to review and you can't review it because the language fluency isn't there, then yeah, you can't review it. And so you should comment on it, because you're not able to give the feedback that the editor needs in order to be able to evaluate it. And it might be fairer at that stage to just let the authors go away and have it professionally edited or reviewed by a colleague.
Okay. And what should the reviewer's attitude be when detecting poor publication practice?
Yeah, science has historically been a very trust-based enterprise. You trust that you're looking at a graph, and you trust that the graph represents the results that the researchers got when they did the experiment. I think that there's been a lot of high-profile retractions over the last few years. There was a very famous one about during the pandemic, where there was an error in the data, basically, and it turned out that half of the authors hadn't ever seen the data itself, and they had just taken on trust that the data was fine. And so I think data availability statements are a really great step forward in making sure that it's possible to verify if you do suspect something is not quite right. And I mean, of course, that's not to say that you can't fabricate data as well, but I think that a reviewer's attitude should be, if you are suspicious, then I would recommend taking some steps to investigate that. Now that might be you yourself go and look at the data that's available and check and see how you feel, see if that kind of reassures you and your concerns. It might be that you can't be reassured, or and you need to contact the journal editor, and your suggestion to the journal editor might be, I always recommend, for your own benefit, explaining your concerns very neutrally and not making accusations, because mistakes also happen. Honest error also happens. But explaining your concerns neutrally to the journal editor, who have more resources. For example, there's usually a research integrity team at the journal that can look into concerns with your support often as well. So the attitude is, mistakes happen, honest mistakes happen. Unfortunately, misconduct happens. It's rare, but it does happen. And so if you're suspicious, you're an expert in the field, otherwise you wouldn't be reviewing it. And so if you have suspicions, it's always worth kind of just following up on those somewhat, until at least you are satisfied to be able to write a review report on the manuscript.
All right. Yeah. There is another one about predatory journals. I have a question. Just because a journal charges a cheaper APC, should it be considered predatory?
No. I think that there's lots of different APC bands that get charged. Some are supported by governments. We have some are supported by being non-profit, and sometimes they can make their APCs a little bit lower. If it's a society, the society dues that members pay can support the APCs. Some, like in the humanities, APCs tend to be a little bit lower as well. So I think there's if it's a big publisher and they've just launched a new journal, they might, Carragher sometimes launches a journal. We've launched a journal in the past, and the APCs have been, no APCs have been charged for a year because it's a new journal, and that doesn't mean that it's predatory. It just means that the publisher has decided that that is what they want to do on that journal. So no, absolutely not. And really it's about the absence or lightness of a peer review process, not looking after you as an author, not promoting your articles after they're published, not indexing them so that you can maximize the visibility, not to be a member of COPE or to be included in the DOAJ. Those are the two resources that I mentioned. It takes a lot of work as a publisher to make sure that we're up to those standards. And so if it's a journal that doesn't care about the research that it publishes, they're not likely to have put that effort in to meet the standards of those to those committees and groups. So yeah, but I would have a look at, if you ever want a quick answer, I always suggest looking at membership in COPE and DOAJ, and looking at Think, Check, Submit. It's another great resource for checking the kind of trustworthiness of the journal.
Perfect. Thank you. We have no more questions. And thanks to the audience for all these questions. Quite interesting. And yeah, any final comments from your side, Grania?
No, thank you everybody for coming and staying. And yeah, the questions have been really interesting. People have brought up all the things that I would have wanted to talk about in terms of peer review, openness and recognition of peer reviewers. So thanks everybody for bringing those up so we could talk about them too.
Amazing. So yeah, I'll make the recordings available. We also work on subtitles in Portuguese to upload on YouTube afterwards. Thanks everyone. Wish you, Grania, a nice weekend. Thanks a lot. Wordless to thank you enough. And yeah, muito obrigado, pessoal. Um abraço, bom final de semana para todo mundo e estamos em contato. Obrigado. Thank you. Bye bye.
Have a great weekend, everyone.